Hello and welcome to another episode of Quantum Achievers. And today I have a very special guest who is family. There's no other word for it. I was going to say I don't know what I was going to say, but I was just like, there's no other word for it. It's family. This is Peter Smith. Um, he has been the president of the Newton Institute for many, many, many years. I think he stepped back after God knows how many years, 10 years at least as president serving there, but you're very actively involved in the board and so forth. He's also the founder of the Quantum Institute here in Australia, which is worldwide, not just here in Australia. And he's been one of the absolute uh, what's the word? Creators, explorers um, in the realms of the quantum. And I first came across Pete when my wife was desperate for how I could get some help. A lot of you know my story about having an experience with DMT, which I don't recommend to anyone whatsoever. And I keep saying that whenever I get the chance. But I was in a lot of trouble. And my wife actually was walking, asking Spirit, how do I get help for Nathan? And I was back in Australia at this point, and she literally was funneling through a cupboard in an old bag that she'd brought along to our relationship when we first started going out many years ago. And a book fell out of it, and it was The Journey of Souls by Michael Newton. And she immediately picked it up, and she's like, right, somehow this is linked to helping Nathan. And she ended up getting on to Pete, who just happened to live in Melbourne at that time. And I had a quantum integration session with this glorious human, and I was catapulted basically instantly into a dimension that I haven't seen really often. This was like shades of glass doing an operation, and with this magician Pete Smith sitting here, who has crafted the skill to the point that he runs institutes. He's literally one of the best in the world, and he trained me, and that was a glorious thing because obviously it's sprung out to what we're doing, and he's basically the guy that's sort of kickstart. He's the battery charger of Earth, and I just tuned in just prior to see what are we meant to be talking about, and actually Spirit showed me a meat pie, and it was like about nourishment. I'm like, interesting, and that there's a thirst for this nourishment of what we can do in the quantum, how we're stepping around into this remembrance. So, welcome to Quantum Achievers, Pete. How are you today?
I'm good, Nate. And of all the podcasts I've done over the years, I've never quite had an introduction like that.
Well, I don't know you like I do.
That's true. Let me say it's good to be part of this family, and it's nice to no longer be a black sheep in the family, as a lot of people who talk like you and I end up being. So I'm delighted to be here, and these people, I don't know how they want to listen for, because I think you and I could go for about 4 days sharing our
Yes, I know.
quantum experiences, the ones we've both had individually and together. But I'm just delighted to be here and to talk all things quantum. And you and I have had incredible conversations. I'm glad to be able to share them now.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. People who are listening to this, they're feeling the threads of this crossing into their worlds. I had a client the other day who just said you just kept popping up everywhere, and I find that that's happening. And you've been in this game a lot longer than me. I mean, when you first started, what was it like? What were the words that people used in this realms? And would you kind of be, as you said, the black sheep of the family? Like, what would have happened if you just started to mention what we could do as humans?
Well, I guess the spiritual path for me was a classic, because about 25 or maybe more years, I learned this thing called Reiki, and no one had ever heard about it then. And that's how
25 years
far,
ago. Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's how far we've come, is that most people have heard of that type of hands-on healing with Japanese heritage. But for me, when I trained originally, over 20 years ago now, I trained as a hypnotherapist. And gradually over the years, that morphed out into something. I got into the Life Between Lives work, as you mentioned, with Michael Newton, ended up working with him. I really started hypnotherapy because I was interested in past lives, because I'd already been a client at that stage. and I'd seen some stunning stuff, and I thought, this can't be real. And then I got on the old Google and the old dial-up days and started to research one of my past lives from the war. And you know, most of our guys might be too young to remember the old dial-up, but it was so slow, and for a photo to load, it would go line by line. And I saw this World War II picture of a submarine that I had a past life flash of, and had enough information to research it. And every line it went down, my jaw dropped another level lower and lower and lower. And by proving reincarnation for me, I proved the theory for everybody as far as I was concerned. And that's when I fully surrendered into this spiritual path.
Mm.
Eventually, I got interested in quantum physics. The further I went, I thought, all this stuff about the subconscious. Why are we exploring people's subconscious when we got the whole universe at our fingertips?
Mm.
So quantum physics was the springboard for me to then get involved in that, the many worlds interpretation, string theory with, 12 different dimensions, one of time and 11 of space. I mean, by the time you start to bring some of the quantum physics into spirituality, you no longer see them as separate. You see them as this incredible overlap, and that overlap we can call consciousness,
Yeah.
because everybody is part of that. And you can
Yeah.
talk to a scientist about consciousness. I can talk to a quantum physicist about consciousness. I can talk to a spiritual person about consciousness. I can talk to my kids about consciousness. I mean, this is the piece that it all hangs off, I feel.
Oh, absolutely. I've actually have found myself Googling what's been found in quantum physics. And then in my sessions, I'll actually do that. I'll actually, a lot of my techniques have been from understanding what scientists have done, which springs an idea. And you said before, life between lives, right? So for people that are listening to this maybe for the first time and sort of wanting to know more about this, life between lives is basically an idea that there is no time. So everything exists now. And so even the term past life to me is kind of a little bit quite off, it's 0 point. So what we've done as a human race is we've dropped ourselves into a deeper state of separation, which is a time space dimensional uh, framework for which we interpret everything, which is why Einstein says, you can't solve a problem from the same consciousness that has created it. So what Pete's saying is he gets involved, gets a couple of images of a submarine, Googles it and sees, wow, that's actually happened in a past relationship to what he experienced in the now. And so when you start looking at quantum physics, we can do some really, really cool things. And Pete, I don't know how many hours you've clocked up in the quantum with clients. It would be, well, it would have, put it this way, if you're a used car, you wouldn't buy you.
Well, fortunately, your theory saves me, because there is no time.
That's
So
right.
I'm no longer old and tired or anything like that. And everything's unfolding at the same time. And what you say is absolutely correct, Nate. Um, you know, I believe that linear time is a fluid construct for learning in the third dimension.
Mm,
And
Shining word.
time goes short, time goes long. You watch one of your favorite shows and it's over before you start. You go and visit the in-laws, and time might stretch out a little. So so time is malleable, depending on the vibration in which you hold it. There's a lot of information that is starting to emerge that talks about how time is not what we think it really is. And the further I get into this work, where we get outside of 3D and we move into these other realities, these other dimensions, as you say, I call past lives parallel lives. Even in my early days when I started as a past life therapist, someone would go to that place where they were holding what I call a quantum echo from another lifetime.
Mm,
And they'd be on the floor of the Colosseum, and they're in a battle with another gladiator, or getting eaten by a lion or something like that. And they're not talking to me, oh, this happened to me 2,500 years ago, and this was like that. And they're not saying that. They're saying the sword is going into my side. I can feel my life slipping away. I'm now above my body. I'm looking down. I can see that this is the moment of my death. They're all talking in the present tense.
mm,
And this is something that's thousands of years old. So that started to show me that time is not what we feel it is. Time is something that's difficult, and we just need that linear infrastructure so that we can integrate it into our life so we can have learnings within that same life in that same infrastructure.
Yes, because you're right that the quantum echo, right? So it echoes across. It's kind of like a sheet of a bed sheet, and there's a heavy weight, and it kind of pulls us into this weight. So if there's a trauma that's existing in our alternate realities, then it does affect us here. And I've got a lot of clients that have done a lot of work. Let's say the personal development work, the psychological based personal development work. You know, they've worked out that mummy and daddy didn't give them enough attention when they were young, and they've done some work on themselves and so forth. But they're still not being able to move forward. And when you're seeing these echoes, as you call it, um, it's so interesting how there's a period of time where you got to clean that up. And what is such an opportunity is that we've got you and I on a call together. So a lot of the work we do with people is they're experiencing that, right? So I want to take it even deeper and further, because why the hell not?
Yes,
So
please.
yes, so that sort of, no offense to anyone listening to this who's astonished by that, but Pete and I have been doing that for many, many years. So it's like, what's possible now? And at the start, I tuned into spirit and I saw this nourishment of a meat pie, and spirit's like, we're going to be nourishing on this because there's quite literally a completely different operating system of which we can operate from to make better decisions in a much better world as we start to build it with balance and harmony. And I find the more I go into the quantum and extract, it's like hanging out with a really fit person. You know, I'm starting to eat healthier. You know, it's better thoughts of a whole system. Tell me, Pete, from your experience, what's it like for someone to sort of start in a what I call Windows 95 operating system? It's very demonic, very manipulative. Well, that's just the owner of it, but anyway, the Windows 95, that is. But the extent of that, as you start to go in the quantum, as you start to hear yourself from these alternate realities, what's possible? Let's just, like, if we can, for this conversation, for people listening, give them something
Mm.
to aspire to. What's on our horizon? What's on your horizon from your point of view, from your experience, from where you sit in the world as one of the world's leaders in this? Tell me.
Okay. Well, first of all, I've got to crack some sort of a joke about you getting a meat pie and running beef on your property. But but anyway,
Total
um,
another message.
yeah. But let me talk about the series. You know, Nate, we're talking here of people who've been living and breathing this for many years, and a lot of people are just starting off. So I want to start at the beginning, as you say, the Windows 95 version, and start to build up.
Yep.
And for me, I was a past life client. That's what kicked me off. Before that, I was a Reiki practitioner, and that was all 20 to 30 years ago, whenever it
Before that,
was.
a high executive at a major bank.
That's right. Yeah. And very unhappy doing so, may I add. But anyway, um, there's something about the trail of breadcrumbs and continuing to follow that trail because your soul places them there. Okay. So whether it's a book that falls from a cupboard like it did when it cracked Brooke on the melon, whether
Hmm.
it's, you know, a conversation with somebody, whether it's an article that comes to you from a couple of different people. Once we pay attention, our soul starts to speak to us through this 3D infrastructure that we've got. Now, the first thing to understand is to start to question things. A lot of people are stuck looking at Netflix, eating bad food, in a job they don't like, thinking that, well, the whole success is about financial wealth. I mean, all of these things are just different expressions of energy, and most of them are a model from modern society that keep you trapped. So the first thing for people to do is to say, what else is there? Where can I go from here? What can I do? And then if you're open to that, then the opportunities will come. You may have a dark night of the soul. You may have some childhood trauma that comes back, like you mentioned about childhood, whatever it might be. The interesting thing about that is that you will sometimes get that echo from childhood, and you'll find that issue, which you then might find in another lifetime, which you may then find that you planned it when you came into this lifetime to bring it in here so that you could clear it. And that
Hmm.
would be your rounded out learning. So to understand that everything that comes into your line of sight is pushed there by your soul. And it's the way you read that landscape. So what's this trying to teach me? Why did I choose this mother? You can ask some very good questions when people are out of their 3D reality and out of their human intellect. What was the greater lesson of having a narcissistic mother, for example? People will say, well, she was here to teach me how much damage that people can absorb in childhood so I could become the best possible healer I could be.
Mm.
Once you find a higher purpose, even in these small human things, that's the way to go. So ask the questions, start to explore, be open to the fact you might be multidimensional. If you're open to that fact that time is an illusion and there may be more to this landscape than we know, then you start to get metaphysical experiences. Am I part of the universe itself? You ask that question, you start to get little cosmic snippets come through that can be explored. We take people out of their bodies all the time. We go to other dimensions, we go to other planets, we go to other places, we go to childhood. We sort things out. We go to the womb when they're in utero before they're even born, and we realize that they're picking up some things from mum that they brought into this lifetime with them. And nothing against mum. She was just having stresses at the time, and the baby was plugged into her system. They might even be empathic. Okay, so they might pick up energy easily from others. And there's a whole generation of empathic people coming to this planet now to rebalance humanity because we've been too desensitized to the wars, to the cruelty, to the horrible things on this planet. We've been desensitized to it. Hollywood has a lot to answer for this, by the way.
Mm.
The only movies, I won't watch a movie that's less than 10 years old because the violence in movies today is just ridiculous. Unless it's a
Yeah.
good comedy or something. But
Yes.
there's something here about what brings spiritual development is that capacity and that willingness to explore. And then the universe will put you on the fast track to discovering more of who you are and what your place in the universe is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more with that. And the people listening to this who have been on the journey for a while, and let's just say they're starting to tune into an alternate reality of a future version of themselves that hold a higher potential timeline. Um, I've found a correlationship, obviously, between healing these quantum echoes and changing the vertical axes of your growth. So, for example, the three-dimensional grid line of we're lacking love, we're avoiding fear and failure, and we're not loved, creates a vortex of the human experience in the Windows 95. So a lot of the euphorium things is about attacking the foundations of that and then exploring into the future version of you, um, and extracting ideas, entanglement, and just hanging out, getting healthier with what type of beliefs would they have about themselves, what type of ideas, wisdom, and so forth. From your experience, and this is where I find it really incredibly fascinating, this work, is that we quite literally can tune into a future version of ourselves. I've got like people that are writing books from their future version of themselves and extracting and reading it. I've got people tuning into just this, as you know, it's an infinite realm. What's been your experience, Pete, of things that excite you that could create a real different correlation in humanity coming back to a harmonic balance with this work?
I want to ground this a little in the fork in the road from where I had to leave quantum physics behind. And if I go back to the beginning, there was a guy by the name of Everett. And in 1957, he wrote a PhD paper. John Wheeler was his supervisor for that PhD paper. And if you don't know John Wheeler, he worked a lot with Einstein, one of the greatest physicists ever to come out of America. And this guy put forward, this Everett, Hugh Everett, he put forward this concept that rather than the collapse of the wave function into one single reality, that wave function continues on into all of its different dimensions. And the only thing that we collapse is the one reality that we want to see through the observer effect.
Mm.
Now, without trying to get too complicated in quantum physics, because I'm not a quantum physicist and I probably couldn't do it justice anyway, what that's telling us is that there is a multiverse out there. We
Mm.
see one, but the others are out there. When they got down into string theory and they looked at 11 different dimensions, there were 5 different versions of string theory. Then another guy called Witten came along and he collapsed them all into M theory, or what they called superstring theory, by adding another dimension. Now, what I want to say is, the black and white of the world is mathematics.
Mm.
Okay. I wasn't very black or white at school because I was too busy playing sport, I think, and doing other things rather than maths. But the mathematicians tell us that in string theory, um, the maths make sense.
Hmm.
They've mathematically proved these other dimensions. And quantum physicists say, oh, well, string theory is still a theory until you've done some experimental work. And the other guys in the standard model are saying, well, general relativity, et cetera, versus, string theory, which is the model. And that's where the conversation stops. So if the multiverse is mathematically proved, then they're having this conversation about whether it exists or not because these strings are so small you can't do the research on them. This is where we get the fork in the road. Well, if you prove to the multiverse exists, how do we explore it? You guys, uh, you guys aren't exploring it from your own mindset because you're trying to do it in a lab. We'll take consciousness out into the universe and we'll prove it for you. So
Hmm.
that's where the multiverse comes from. So people like you and I are out in the multiverse. Now, if we follow those very solid theories that are well endorsed by a lot of very good quantum physicists, there is absolutely no reason why we can't go into the multiverse and cherry pick the reality that we're going to have after a number of different decisions that cause the other realities. Now, why would you not do that? We know that time and space doesn't exist as we know it. We know that consciousness can leave the body and return, and it's not, and consciousness can leave 3D, go into 4, 5, 6D, whatever the multiverse, and come back. Why would we not use our consciousness as the beautiful bait hook to throw out into the universe there and pull in that reality that we want? This just makes perfect sense,
Hmm.
even in regard to quantum physics. And that's what we're doing. If we can find that highest possible vibration, you're doing this, I'm doing this, we call it ultimate consciousness. But, we pull it out of the future, and that person blends with that vibration, and that future state of being becomes their self-fulfilling prophecy. We collapse all lower vibration timelines into that particular aspect of them, and they live their
Yes.
life in the new vibration.
Yes. I mean, and this is the thing, I try to stay away from scientists because I feel that they limit what we can actually do. And as you know, I sort of catapulted myself into the quantum realm through plant-based medicine. Let's call it, well, they call it medicine, but it was a drug dealer. It wasn't a shaman. A shaman's a qualified person in this regards, and there's no university that teaches any of this sort of stuff. So I'll just put a little warning sign in there. If this sounds all fun and you think the plant medicine is going to take it through you, if you try to steal the treasure without doing the work, you will have a psychosis. Well, I'm not going to say you will, but I will say that you have a high risk of not coming out of it very well. So when I went through this experience, I couldn't stop traveling the multiverse. Most people want to get there. I couldn't stop it. I could have a light go off. I could just hear a sound, and the sound would turn into a, and then whoosh, that sound would take me into a vortex wormhole. And then, you know, it'd take me days and days to settle down from that. The nervous system was completely broken. I didn't know whether I was male or female for a good couple of weeks. I mean, I literally went back to zero, and it was a very, very confronting period. And so it brought me back to a real base understanding that we are literally consciousness, which what is that? It's like this vibration, it's an energy thing, but we also have some control over it in a co-creative kind of way. And so it wasn't until I had this moment in Los Angeles when I was sitting in the bathtub and I was suicidal. It was like, there's no way
Mm.
I can survive like this. This what? It's like a building just had the foundation taken out of it and sitting on a feather. The wind blows slightly and the whole house is over. So that's where I was at. And it was a really challenging time. But to come back and to make sense of all of this now, from 2009 backwards, to not listen to the scientists is actually, if I went, and people are going to probably not like this comment, but if I went to a doctor at that time, they would have put me in some type of mental institution. And I wasn't needing mental institution. I was having a spiritual emergency. And if I didn't come to see you at that point in time, I don't know what would have happened. It was like these light beams came in from another dimension. I haven't seen them often. Like I said, they were glass kind of related. So that we're talking a very high dimension that they don't need the carbon-based body. So these things, and I know you said, let's ground it. And I go, yeah, cool. I get it. Let's ground it. But someone from my perspective, I didn't have let's say the luckiness to ground something. I was in a lot of trouble and I needed things that worked. And everything that I'd learned from a psychological based thing, from the Tony Robbins training that I'd done to the NLP training that I'd done, all of these things were not helping me at all. And so uh, I guess I'm coming from the reverse hero's journey and grounding and grounding and grounding. And what Pete just said is really like, if you didn't grasp it, it's like, take another listen. You can. And yes, you can tune into a higher dimensional reality of you that has able to extract a higher level of light and remembrance of its infinity incredibleness, its geniusness. And it is creating a bigger impact that creates a deeper satisfaction, a deeper contribution, a deeper sense and experience of joy, love, wisdom, abundance, prosperity that is better for all. It has crossed boundaries that you haven't been able to do inside this body, and humanity doesn't use this as a resource. And I pose the question, what if this was normal? What if this was like, I wake up and boom, I have to tune into something that is potential, let's call it, and start an entanglement with it. And from that entanglement, like you said, collapsing other timelines. So this is like from jumping from this reality to the next. It was hard for me to work this out, and I kind of did it on my own. And what it started to show me was triangles, and I was starting to see how two triangles sitting on top of each other. So there's a higher dimensional self, but it couldn't come through if I had a third dimensional identity that was in stark contrast to what this potential was. So I was a real estate developer in Melbourne, and now I had to drop that identity and attitude and become, organic farmer in Byron Bay who's teaching quantum consciousness. As you've been pushing me for a long, long time, Pete, I finally started to certify people in coaching. And I had my first whole day training last week, and it was phenomenal. We had such a great experience. So thank you for pushing me to that.
Thank you for listening.
Well, it took me 3 years or so to finally get to the point. But these are the integration things that you're talking about, collapsing these timelines. There was a real deep belief in me that it's like, I'm not, well, who am I to do that? Why should I be doing this? And these are the things that we're talking about when we're collapsing timelines. So if you're into like transformation or transcendence, which I think is a word that you really instilled in me many years ago. Tell me that word. What does that word mean, Pete, to you? Transcendence.
Transcendence means moving to a new vibration where the old can't touch you. And
Elaborate.
there was a time when I used to, one of the things I had to do along the way, Nate, as you've surrendered things, I have too, like the old banking days. I've also surrendered being a good therapist. I was actually a really good therapist. I used to be able to find things that other people couldn't find, but I had to let go of the fact because I needed to really understand that people had their own answers. My role was just to facilitate them towards the solutions that they already held. And once I used to help people heal, now I help people transcend. And I take them out of their body and they look back at their body and they can see from that enlightened viewpoint what the emotions are really about that they're struggling with, what the physical issues in their body is that they're holding. Why is the energy being held there? Well, that's being held there because of, we don't claim to do anything with cancer, but I can tell you that I've pulled 12 separate traumas out of a tumor, and that tumor started to change. I mean, these are individual and unique stories. There's no process.
No. Now back it up there, Pete. Let's talk about this. So you have a disease, a disease, right?
Yeah.
That sits inside a human body, right?
Yeah.
You pull how many traumas out of that?
12 out of one tumor. I've had a couple of clients where I've pulled a number out of tumors.
Was that from this timeline, these traumas, or were they from alternate realities?
This timeline.
Combination? This timeline. Do you find that the density stacked higher in this timeline to disease, or can alternate realities create disease as well?
No, it's all the ones I've seen so far have been this timeline. But what it means is, and this is what I was talking about before we can go multidimensional, you've got to solve some stuff that's right in your face. And somebody comes to me and they've, my doctors have given up on me. I've got a number of, things happening in my body. I've got a tumor here. Okay, well, let's ask the tumors why they're there. Let's tune into them. Let's get their story. Let's find out what they hold there. And if you go in and you release that, and then there's other ways you can work with the consciousness of water, which is a piece of work that's brand new that we're working with a group
Tell us
because we're
about this.
70% water. All right, let me
Can you,
come back to
can
the
you,
water in a sec.
okay. But
Let me
start with the first question that you coined to
and,
me
and
3 months ago, 6 months ago. So
okay, I want to go back to
people are
the
fascinated by this.
ayahuasca. I want to go back to the ayahuasca thing too.
Sure.
So the body is the greatest messenger we know. If the body is out of resonance, then the body will tell you. Tumors are a gathering of little pieces of dissonance into one tumor so they can all be gathered in one spot to get your attention. Now, if you have a conversation with that tumor, if you get to know that tumor and you find out what's wrong with that tumor, what its story is, what it's holding, all that sort of stuff, and you release the traumas that supported that tumor in the first place, the body is no longer blocked from its healing mechanisms. I believe from my experience with clients, I'm not a cancer researcher, I'm no oncologist, and I wouldn't want to be one because their limiting views, I don't think, are always in the best interests of the patient. If we look at cancer from a different perspective, we can find different solutions. Okay, now what we've been doing is to understand those tumors, and then the client has a choice. It's all about the client's choice. Well, now that I understand my traumas, do I need to keep this tumor, or can my body start to break it down and let it go? Everybody
Mm,
has their own individual story around that. Everybody has their own different opportunity to that. But we've already provided that person an option that the medical system could not.
mm,
I've worked with people who've been paid out on their superannuation, all sorts of stuff, because the medical system's given up on them. And we do some work. And I'm currently working with a guy that they gave him his wife the end of life chat months ago, but he's still hanging in there. He's gone
mm,
home and he's feeling good. So exactly what's happening in his body is up to him because he's creating it.
mm.
So there's that piece, but there's another piece on the back of this that is to do with water. So, do you want me to move to the water thing now? Or do you
Well, there
want to
was
ask about
one
some of the
question
other
there.
stuff?
I mean, people, you said you're creators, and this is something that I think is a stepping stone for humanity to actually see this as normality. What we're talking about right now is that if you're not aware that your thoughts, words, and actions are creating your reality through a vibrational essence, they're steering you like a rudder into different time zones, different timelines, I like to say. And the timelines are here to correct you back to a higher timeline. And so you're going to manifest things that are going to help you get better. So people think in a linear sense, oh, things will gradually get better. But I always say when you're manifesting from a quantum point of view, uh, breaking out timelines to get to the highest point of view, it won't work in a linear point of view. But it'll be a major challenge that you need to have in order to get to the next stepping stone, let's say. And so you'll think, oh my God, it's so hard. This is terrible. This doesn't work. Actually, it's working really well because you're having to get through these major challenges. And as we've said in this timeline, or I call it the third dimensional timeline, which is the one that we're currently experiencing, our childhood and the traumas and so forth has a stronger density to it. And the density, I believe, can gravitate and evacuate you from potential and bring you into a vortex of suffering. So when we understand that you're creating this is based upon you're giving energy to a base, a system that is in play that's creating this vortex. And then, of course, the body responds, life responds to help you rebalance. But if we're not listening because we're not valuing the fact that our thoughts, words, and actions have a weighted average of energy and a real cause and effect to it, then humanity is not quite there yet in understanding the physics of that. And I heard a term the other day. I was getting interviewed on Byron Bay Radio, and they said, "What?" And I had a really massive experience meditating just prior to it, and that was all white light sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden, I found myself in the foyer of this Byron Bay Radio, and they say, "What do we call you? What's your title?" And I was like, "Oh shit!" And I just called myself a consciousness physics strategist or something. Just came out of my mouth because I was. But that's kind of like what I'm trying to. Consciousness physics is a really, I believe, a really good terminology that presupposes that thoughts, words, and actions have a real effect. It's like consciousness physics. It's like, what is your consciousness creating in your physics? And then the strategist part is how do we recorrect that to collapse the
Mm.
timelines that are holding you into a more limited suffering point of view into a higher one. So whether it came in the body as dis-ease or whether it comes as financial struggle or relationship struggle or whatever, it's all because you've created it. And it's a hard one to grasp, I think, for a lot of people. So in that, now let's talk about water. Um, and and then maybe start, Pete, with a question you posed to me that sort of blew my brain for a long time. And honestly, it was just like computer says no. I didn't have an answer. But pose that question to everyone here, or that analysis
Okay.
of water as ice.
Okay. Oh, yeah, the water is ice thing. Okay. First of all, I want to throw a term at you that I came up with for the last book, and rather than have be a quantum physicist, I see people like you and me are maybe quantum metaphysicists.
Yes, quantum meta.
So, so
Nice one.
yeah, yeah. So I was drawn to
Might put that on my
water.
business card.
Yeah, absolutely. It's shorter than what you had, I think.
Yeah,
But
just
let
as
me.
confusing.
That's right. Well, it starts the conversation, mate. That's all you need.
It certainly does. Like, just you must be
Uh,
really smart with all those big words. I'm like, oh, I'm going to let you down.
well, it depends on the definition of smart. I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, academically
That's
smart
another conversation.
that isn't going to change the world so much. And with all due respect to my dear friends who've gone through academia, and I've done some of that myself too, of course. But let me get on the water. I've always been inspired by Dr. Emoto's work, Masuru Emoto, with his water crystals work. And I first looked at that maybe 15 or 20 years ago when he
Maybe
was
just
first
briefly
putting
tell
that
the
out.
audience, in case they haven't seen Dr.
Yeah,
Emoto's.
yeah. Masuru Emoto was a Japanese PhD doctor. He worked out that water crystals, when frozen, caught the consciousness of the water in that moment and froze it in time. He did some experiments where he got water crystals and he put them in a beaker in his laboratory and he labeled them with the word love, and he enabled one with the word hate. He then froze those water crystals and he found out that the water that was labeled love formed these beautiful geometric shapes, almost sort of beautiful crystal forms and all of that that were phenomenal, sacred geometry at its best. The ones that had hate on there formed these horrible, murky sort of crystals and all that sort of stuff. So through that, he went further. He did a whole lot of other experimentation, working with what you say to water, what you don't say to water, how it catches the consciousness of that moment and traps it in time and echoes back to you the state of that water. He wrote some books. He took photos all around the world. He tells a story in one of his books, Hidden Messages of Water, I think it's called. He wrote in that book that he took people to a lake in Japan and they blessed the water. They spoke to the water. They sent love to the water. The algae didn't come that year for the first time in living memory.
Mm.
Okay, so what this tells us is that water is catches consciousness. Now, if we're 70% water, what's the potential of that for offering loving words into the water that runs through somebody's body? So some of the work that we've been doing, we're starting to do now, is to talk to the water in the client's body and to offer it 3 vibrational frequencies. Emoto loved the first 2. Love and gratitude. And he felt that gratitude was even higher because when he got the crystals of water that was done with love and gratitude, and then love and then gratitude separately, the love and gratitude always formed the higher vibration of the gratitude crystals, echoed the ones that were just gratitude. So he led that to believe that they went to the highest vibration, gratitude was higher. We've been experimenting, not freezing water crystals, but experimenting with clients. And I've got,
But hang on, that makes sense. You know, like just
yeah,
gratitude could be coming from anyone's level of ascension to
yeah,
say,
absolutely.
I'm really grateful. But if you add in there, I am love, is that
Yeah,
what you,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
there's
So,
remembrance beyond separation.
yeah,
So you're
so
actually tuning into a high different frequency of the two.
yeah,
Brilliant.
So we do love and we do gratitude, and we've brought in a third vibration, grace.
Ah,
And
beautiful.
grace is the remembering of our divinity,
Mm.
that we are part
Like
of all
zero
there
point.
is. Yeah,
It's like you
we
can
are.
glide. Grace can just glide across like the spider across all of web,
Yeah,
you know, with grace.
yeah, exactly. So by the time we add these three frequencies into the water within a client's body, we just let the water do the work. What does a client most need? What are they looking for? We always set an intention before we start anyway. But we've been activating the water in people's bodies and we're just waiting for the results. It's a new piece of work that we're doing. But the people who are experiencing this, because of course we put all our practitioners through this first, the stories they told were just phenomenal. You know, I believe water has this incredible potential. What I can tell people now, even at this early stage, is that water is both an activator and an amplifier of consciousness. I believe that water has incredible healing properties that we don't really understand. And I'm only talking about fresh water. I'm talking about the water that falls into your tanks at your place, Nate. I'm talking about the water I used to drink out of the river at the farm I was on for a while. I'm talking about pure water that you buy that do not have chemicals, particularly fluoride. Let's not go there.
You think,
So,
well, okay. Forget
because,
the biological what happens to the body with fluoride. And of course, the Nazi parties, Nazi parties, the Nazis used it in World War II in the prisoner of war
yeah,
camps.
and
We,
the suppression of the pineal gland and all that stuff. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, um, yeah. That's a really interesting topic that I would love to always dive into. And but let's just come back on the water for a moment. This is
Sure.
phenomenal. I mean, first of all, we're saying, hey, you can jump into an alternate version of yourself, collapse timelines, and become that person. Who wouldn't want to do that? Second of all, we're saying, hey, water as an activator and a magnetizer. I think you said the words or something like that.
Yeah, an amplifier. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. And so used in the right contexts, such as the words gratitude, love, and grace, which are not just words, they're like playing a piano with different octaves. They're playing different frequencies. And then
Well,
you're playing with these different harmonics, basically
absolutely.
sound and
Absolutely.
energy through the words, which is why spelling is, or television, these things are programming things,
Mm, mm.
and so tell me, you've said some of the early results here are quite phenomenal. Can you elaborate a little bit on one of those that stand out?
People are having remarkable experiences by talking to the water in their body and finding out more about themselves. Because when you think about it, if water holds consciousness and you want to tune into the consciousness in your body, you'll ask the water. That just makes perfect sense. But if you
Mm,
activate that water into its highest possible consciousness first before you ask the questions, then you're going to get the best possible answers that often come from a metaphysical perspective. Now, these three frequencies that we've selected, obviously, Emoto experimented with the first two. Grace as well. If you look at the map of consciousness by Dr. David Hawkins in his book Power versus Force, these things are right up there.
mm,
So
mm.
there's something about the highest possible vibration. We should always be in touch with the highest possible vibration we can, because the ripple of that through our 3D is really what is going to take humanity forward.
Now, just coming back to this on the ice,
Yeah. Oh,
just
yes, the ice story.
yes, share with
Yeah,
us
I've
what does
got
that got to do with the price of fish
what
in Japan?
frozen fish, maybe. Um, so one of the guys that we've worked with over the years, he's quite brilliant. He's written his own past life books. He's done our universal consciousness work at Institute for Quantum Consciousness, and he's got a PhD in geology. He's a former mining executive, so he knows all about minerals, groundwater, the Earth's crust, the whole lot, and all that sort of stuff. So I posed the question to him about water. I said, look, I'm starting some water research. You can do some experimentation through the water in people. What can you tell me? He says, well, Pete, water is the only substance on this whole planet that is less dense in its solid form.
Mm,
And I said,
mm,
what do you mean by that? He said, well, water shouldn't float.
mm,
Water shouldn't float. And if water didn't float, it would kill all the marine life at the bottom of the ocean. It would just sink down and crush them.
mm,
And that'd be the end of it. Because ice will float in your drink. An iceberg will float in Antarctica. I mean, that's just what ice does. And the more I thought about it, the more I said, well, the consciousness of water, I mean, there's a level of awareness here. It not just catches the consciousness, but there's a lady in New Zealand called Veda Austin. She's been doing some work with water as well. She's followed Moto's water crystals. She's taken it a new direction and done some of her own work as well. And she's saying that consciousness is not just in the water, but there's a reflection back from her own consciousness. There's a communication happening between her
mm,
and the water. She stuck a hand in a petri dish and she froze the water and it had the figure of a hand in the water. So water
mm,
has memory, water
mm.
has consciousness, water has memory, and memory is a fundamental aspect of consciousness anyway. So my conversation with Cloudy, the scientist, um, we came to the conclusion, well, I came to the conclusion, I bounced it off him and he liked it, was why does water float? Sorry, why does ice float? Ice floats because it wants to,
Mm,
because it knows. It knows that if it sinks, it's going to crush the life at the bottom of the planet. It doesn't want to do that because the water is the way in which all that life is held. It holds those marine creatures, both flora and fauna, it holds them in the knowing of its own consciousness and always communicating with them. So that's why the ice doesn't sink, because it doesn't want to hurt them.
mm,
Now that's
mm.
fundamental. If you
That's the only
if
element that does that.
Well, it's the only element that is less dense in solid form. But then Emoto has some work that he shared from University of Iowa, I think. I can't remember the guy's name who did it. But he has a theory that water is extraterrestrial and that when this planet was forming, ice meteors and ice asteroids came into our atmosphere and started to form our oceans. Over millions of years, this cycle of evaporation and precipitation built the oceans. So that's a theory that they were working with out of the University of Iowa, and that had some credibility assigned to it by many. So maybe ice isn't from here because it has a physical property that no other substance on Earth has.
I mean, that kind of gets me thinking about plant medicine and all the rest of it. I mean, these things have different properties as well. I mean, marijuana and ayahuasca and the DMT and all these things have I know the DMT, the one that I had that I didn't even know I was going to have, was an open molecule, so that's why it's an explosive reaction. It doesn't digest, in other words. So a lot of these things you digest it, and then you'll have this experience, but these particular things we're saying they're extraterrestrial. I sort of reverse that and say, well, we're extraterrestrial and we're just
Absolutely.
remembering. And that,
Absolutely.
and it's kind of like, like the same point in time, like, well, why the fluoride in the water, if it's so powerful, why the crystallization of the pineal gland, you know, they don't want access. When I say they, who knows, right? But they don't want access to humans remembering this because of the very things that we're saying. Think of the ramifications on the health industry um, alone, you
Mm.
know,
Mm.
or if we could really tune into future versions of ourselves, the radical changes we would make to economics. On this podcast is one with Phil Anderson, who's one of the best economists on the planet. And we talked about in detail, which he wrote a paper on a number of years ago. And I talk about this a lot because I'm quite interested in it. It's called Citizens Dividend, where no one buys land, they rent it, and that is a dividend that goes to the citizens, and then that's distributed from a citizen's point of view, and it takes away all taxes completely and utterly, and puts money in everyone's bank account, and creates a very community-based management of land, and takes away 80% of the need for any of the government, which we'd be well better off without any of them, really. And yes, I say that, and
Agreed.
I'll say that publicly, and I don't care. So, we look at the ramifications of what if we really tuned into what we're talking about here. And so some of the things like I started exploring with, which was by chance, really, was these Merkabahs. So we're talking about collapsing timelines, right? So after you've done this lifetime, then you've gone into the alternate realities and you've cleaned that up. What I've found is that there's a few things you got to do. There's a couple of negative entities and things like that that pop up for a lot of people, particularly myself. Why? I don't know. I know you haven't had a huge amount of experience with them. Maybe you're just better person. They're like, yeah, let's get that guy. He's a total dickhead. But you know, uh, once you've gone through these processes, which I feel like there are a number of people that are doing this now, like they're gunning for it, and you do have to completely and utterly commit your life to it. There's no other way of doing it. Which is one of the things why you said to me, helping people become certified in what we're talking about here is actually really important because they get to close the loop. There's so much healing done from another 360 degrees when you've got someone in front of you, you really see yourself in them. And so it's like another angle of healing. I can't, kind of like water, really, of conscious, that reflection. So there's the same principle that applies for all things across all fields. And so I find it really fascinating when we've done this lifetime, we've done all alternate reality, and we get into a consistent place of 0 point. There's another friend of mine who's quite a fascinating woman. She's actually coming on next week, and man, she really doesn't have the concept of three-dimensional time physics. Like she hasn't done it for like 30, 40 years. She's worked all over the sort of planet and multiverse, and her whole job is to help the timeline of Earth. So she's entangled with all these different planets, and she speaks about how we've got to get to organic creator, because there's in our solar system, these planets have been placed on the time that we're born, and they all have this vibration, and this vibration imprints on our DNA. And that, in a lone sense, creates a orbit or reincarnation and keeps it going. And she talks about this on a completely different tangent, which is that's quite deliberate, and that we need to get outside of that reincarnation system, organic creation, as she calls it. And once we rid ourselves of that, then we're super, super, super powerful. How do you speak to that?
When I started to do life between lives work 20 years ago, and I first moved outside of the concept of other lifetimes and into what happens in between them, when you stand there in the now time, as Michael Newton called it, and you take a sweeping view across the lineage of your soul, you can heal patterns out of that soul lineage that set you free. For example, you may have been persecuted in a dozen lifetimes. Well, you look at those 12 and you transcend it. You let them go, you set all those guys free, you send them back across time and space to where they're from, back in linear time, send them back under a different vibration. There's no reason why we can't shift anything out of the lineage of our soul. And once we've completed the learning system of the reincarnation cycle, you graduate. So I
What's
love
that
that
mean?
concept. Well, you don't need the reincarnation stuff anymore. As long as you've got all the lessons, if you can look at your whole soul lineage, find out, okay, what do I need to solve, and what have I learned, and what have I got left to learn before I can move to the next level? There's no reason why you can't ask that from the in between, or the afterlife, as some people call it. But even afterlife's not right, no, because it's more the
No.
spiritual realm, because after it's back in linear time again.
Mm,
People
mm,
say I had a past life, and I say cheeky things like, "Oh, are you?" No, no, I had a past life. Oh, are you? And they sort of look at me a bit funny, and then it starts the conversation about how time doesn't really exist.
mm.
So, I like the sound of what this guest you're having next week has. I think she's challenging the traditional models. I think the reincarnation model is sort of fading anyway. Um, I've always had a very different view of karma. I see karma as another chance to get it right, rather
Mm.
than the old eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And, I don't really align. I haven't seen it in any of my research in 20 years that the whole Hinduism, and you go up and down a scale of, you didn't have a good life, so you incarnate as a bug next time. With all due respect to our Hindu listeners, I'm being a bit cheeky there, but there's something about I don't see a status within the reincarnation system.
Mm.
I don't see linear time either. I've had people tell me, "Oh, I'd really like to incarnate in the Middle Ages and find out what that's like. So I'm going to set that up now. I'm in the afterlife, and they step out of linear time and step back into somewhere else. I
Mm.
mean, the model of reality is not what we think it is. And those of us who are moving outside this 3D reality in order to bring greater wisdom and understanding to 3D, I think that more of us need to do that. I think this is what's wrong with some of the sciences. I know for a fact that's what's wrong with psychology, is that we're not, we're only doing cognitive behavioral therapy, and there's lots of spin-offs with that. Some people are doing EMDR. Some people are actually integrating ayahuasca and medicine journeys as psychologists as well. And I think that's more healthy than the, fly by the seat of your pants model that you came through.
Yeah.
So, it's, I think we're starting to get there. Some people are moving slowly towards it. Some people are moving quickly towards it. But, the message I have for people is don't believe anything you're told. Everything we've been educated with is wrong. Our view of reality is flavored with agendas from other people. Challenged a lot of it. I mean, it was Carl Jung who said this 100 years ago. He said, we can never truly become who we are till we release two types of conditioning: familial conditioning from our family and societal conditioning from the society in which we find ourselves and chose to incarnate into, by the way. But what I love about his work is he was not the father of psychoanalysis. He was a spiritual teacher,
Mm.
and I'm working my way through his red book now, and he's talking about a lot of his out of body journeys, and he's saying, "Well, this is my dreams and all that sort of stuff." He's talking about other dimensions in between lives. He's talking about all that stuff,
Mm.
and he had it just beautifully described as his dream work or his personal experiences. And the world's ready to hear that stuff now.
Is there, yes, we uh, haven't, everything we've been told is a lie, which is why I homeschool our children. Um, uh, uh, the consciousness model or reality model that we're being told isn't true, because we can collapse these things and you will experience the same person differently. Literally, we've had that so many different times. You might have someone that you're in an argument with, for example, and you go and communicate with their higher selves, and you do a healing at that altitude, and you will find that that is completely and utterly solved. I use it with my children all the time. Um, One of the things that happened the other day for me, and I wanted to ask you about this, is I was tuning into one of my son's Bodhi, and I probably could have been a better parent that day. And so I'll sit in my spa where I do all my great work, and I tune it into his higher self, coming with gratitude and a little bit of "I'm sorry," you know, and I got zoomed straight away into a car that was, and he was driving. He's only 5, my son, at this
Mm.
present moment, and he was driving, and he was looking at me in the rearview mirror, and he was around about mid-20s, and I had a real sense of understanding that I had what I coined a live link. So it wasn't like a memory based trauma field, and we were sort of fixing it. It was more of a like, this is a direct line to someone that's alive now,
Mm.
and my son and I had this exchange of information. How do you speak to that?
For many years, I've done what is known as regression work. And you take someone back in time and they might have childhood issues and they go back to when they're 5 and you solve it. I solve it very differently these days than what I did 20 years ago when I was first a therapist doing age regression. But if you can remember from the other end, um,
Mm.
why can't you remember from this end? So I saw a wonderful statement of this once, and it said, you know, sometimes if you have a vision of the past, maybe that's future you looking back on this moment as a memory.
Mm.
So maybe that day in the car where you're sitting in the back and Bodhi's driving along, good to let him know he passes his driving test. He'll be happy about that. But but for you, you've had a moment where perhaps you are sitting in the back seat behind him, he's looking at you in the rear view mirror, and you're remembering the day in the spa. Now that event, that because you created that in the future, then you're quantumly entangled with the event that you remembered at that future time.
Yes,
So I think what you've created is a time bridge.
a time bridge. Mm, mm.
That
Well,
would be my
Pete,
take. I've heard other people tell me similar things actually.
okay. Um,
And I guarantee when you're sitting in the car that day, you're going to have deja vu.
oh, absolutely. And there's I have them so often.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
ridiculous, as a
absolutely.
lot of people do. So, if we can jump into alternate realities, if we can and collapse timelines to get there, if we can heal ourselves with water, um, I did see on Gaia, of course, there's hidden technology reverse engineered from aliens that it was a scalar frequency um, vibrational machine that scanned on a cellular subatomic level um, any type of disease, and then they would put water that was, let's say, the inverse relationship to the frequency of that
Mm,
dis-ease. And
mm,
so
mm,
the opposite harmonic, like, in quantum physics, what you're
mm,
okay with must change, right? So
mm,
if you bring the equal opposite in of this water that's healthy and healing, and as you've said with the words um, loving, grace, and gratitude, but in a different type of mix. It's kind of like, for me, it's like three singers getting together or singing in different harmonies, you know? And I know it's a little bit different to that, but it's, how do you, like, what does the
Well,
future look like, and how fast are we going to get there, do you think?
that is really underpinned with something very, very simple. It's wave technology. And any scientist will tell you if you have a wave in a certain frequency and you have a wave in the opposite frequency and you send them both to each other, they cancel each other out. This is what the Monroe Institute have been doing for a long time with their hemisync technology. They send they have a left and a right. And this Robert Monroe, if people don't know who he was one of the original out of body explorers that went on these incredible journeys. And Incredible Journeys is actually the name of one of his books. So they try to get people into a delta brainwave pattern so that they can start to have these out of body experiences. So they put a left and a right earphone, and they put 24 hertz going in one ear and 20 hertz going in the other ear. They cancel each other out, which gives you 4 hertz left over. And that's delta brainwave patterns, but you're still awake. So that's how they create the out of body experiences. So if you've got a wave of distress and you've got a wave of healing heading in the opposite direction, there's no reason why those waves shouldn't cancel each other out. And sound technology is something that's going to become really big. Sound, resonance, that type of technology. Sound technology, this is how they collapse, or this is how they shatter kidney stones with sound waves. I mean, the medical industry is already onto this, but they haven't taken it far enough because it's going to collapse the pharmaceutical system. And that's
Mm,
what props up the medical industry. So they're only allowed to go just so far. I have a dear, somebody who's very dear to me has currently got gallbladder stones. And I made inquiries as to whether we could use the same technology to shatter those stones. Oh, no one's done that before. I don't think we'd be allowed to do that. And that's because all these things are ring fenced.
mm,
And
mm.
that if you try and explore something that's outside the model, it's not going to work. I mean, this is why people have said to me over the years, why'd you never go back and do a PhD, Pete? And I say the whole concept of a PhD is that you need to bring something new to an existing field of work.
Mm, mm,
Well,
mm,
well, you and I are working in a field of work that doesn't exist.
mm.
Quantum
Oh no,
consciousness is not out there and it's not recognized as a field of work.
no.
Consciousness is, quantum physics is, but we're doing something that pulls the best of those two things together and takes into new territory. So I could technically never do a PhD because I'm not willing to extend a field of work that is embraced by academia.
But I mean, also post COVID, so many doctors and so forth that stepped outside of that system. And I was a background entrepreneur. So for me, this is like the best thing ever. It's called disruption. And so it's like, it's a great buzzword. That means look out, because we're coming and we're going to create our new institutions where we don't ask for an apology, nor do we ask for acceptance. It's on. And I say that with a lot of fun. You know,
Yeah.
like I think we will come up with a whole different economics that'll radically change how we treat this planet, which I think is a very, very, very powerful thing. I think it'll create a completely different harmony system with all living things. I think from the work that you've done and the work that I've done and the people that will come on our shoulders, you know, in the next generation, and people that are listening to this now and who have experienced some of this work and go, yeah, that's absolutely true. You can't go back. So like you
Mhm.
get a system that you don't try to fix an old system. Of course, you replace it with one that meets the needs at a far higher level. Well, quantum paradigm and sound technologies and so forth absolutely smashes the pants off the current system to the point that it's laughable. It's not even in the like you wouldn't even like you said, why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you tune into a
Mm.
future version of yourself and start working from
Mm.
that? That they know you better than anyone.
Mm. Oh,
You know, and
exactly.
most therapists think that they are there to heal you, but you're really just helping them remember a higher version of themselves and allow that to occur for them, you know, to take out these traumas and so forth. And that takes skill.
Yeah.
I'm not undermining what we do. You have to be able to understand the language of these dimensions and to really be able to extract for that client to have that great experience where it does literally transcend them. And that's a very I think in the future that'll be people like us will be known. You know, it'll be like a sought out profession. Let's just say, um, as it starts to come in to the
Yeah.
field. So
Yeah,
it's really
absolutely.
exciting.
I love what you're doing, Nate, and I've seen the models that you're using, and I think they're just wonderful. I think they're divinely inspired. If I look at all of the guys that I've worked with over the years, all the people that I train, I say, look, this is what we have to offer you, but you've got to take this forward in your own authentic and powerful way. Go and tell people that they have all their own answers, that nobody needs an intermediary with their own health, with their own body, with their own soul. No one needs a facilitator to tell you you can and can't have a divine experience. Just go out there and have them. We don't need priests. We don't need doctors. We don't need any of these people. There's occasions when we need medical assistance. There's occasions when we need help from another person. And that's what humanity is all about. We're here as one tribe to help and steer each other in the right direction. Those of us who are breaking new ground turn behind us and we're throwing information over our shoulders for other people to catch. But we want everyone to jump into their own wormholes and take their purpose forward because everyone's come here with an offering to humanity is absolutely beautiful, perfect, and unique. We are all
Mm,
here as a tribe of 8 billion people, every single one of us different. And your
yeah,
soul chose the body that you're in ahead of 8 billion other options on the planet. And
yeah,
that's the greatest act of unconditional love we'll ever have. So
absolutely.
I encourage people to explore, go
Yeah,
find the pieces that make an incredible life and live it.
yeah. And you know, the encouragement that you've given me over the years, from heavily involved in as a real estate developer, and then and then untangling them bit by bit. Wow. And here we are today. So, Pete, I'll probably wrap us up there because that feels like a natural ending. And thank you so much. Now, for people that have listened to this incredible human being, how do they get in contact with you? They might want to do one of these sessions that you're talking about. They might want to do some of your training,
Yeah.
etc. What do you got? How do they
Yeah.
get you?
Okay. I've got a personal website, quantumconsciousness.com.au. The people that I work with and the organization that we've founded behind this work is instituteforquantumconsciousness.com, a very long URL, but strangely it was available. Apart from that, I've got a couple of books that are out there: Quantum Consciousness, Journey Through Other Realms, and last year I released my first novel, which was based on a lot of our real experiences, called The Transcendence of Celeste Kelly, and it's about a quantum physicist who finds consciousness and ends up changing the world.
Yes, and I believe I'm Facebook friends with her.
You are indeed, yeah. She's out there, Celeste Kelly. Yeah, yeah,
Yes, Les
yeah.
Kelly.
She said to say hi, Nate.
And these books are fantastic, guys. And definitely, I recommend any of Pete's work. Clearly, and if you're lucky enough to be able to book a session with him or one of his trusted people, So, Pete, thanks so much for your time, mate. I can't wait to tune in. We'll have you back for sure, and we'll extract more. Let me know about this water stuff. It's fascinating, the work you're doing there. Mate, love you, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah, what's love for you too, buddy. Look forward to our next chat.
Cheers, bud.